The first commercial satellite was launched by NASA on July 10, 1962. Developed by Bell Telephone Laboratories for AT&T, the Telstar 1 was the first of its kind.
From a ground station nestled in the mountains at Andover, Maine, a signal is sent to a speeding satellite. An historic feat that could reshape man's future. That satellite, of course, is the Telstar.
The satellite was the world's first active communications satellite and the world's first commercial payload in space. Within 2 days of its launch, the satellite relayed the world's first transatlantic television signal. This novel piece of space tech pioneered an era of providing global information via satellites.
In 1963, the Hughes Corporation launched the much smaller 150-pound SYNCOM-1.
Over the next few decades, many other television satellites were launched into space, providing people across the world to connect to global channels. With the invention of the internet, the next step in satellite communications became internet satellites. Companies such as HughesNet, Viasat, and PanAmSat became major competitors in the space. All of these players produced traditional internet satellites, which sit at an altitude of 22,000 miles from the Earth's surface. They rotate with the Earth and hover in the same point on the equator. In recent years, companies such as Starlink and Project Kuiper have also joined the space, wanting to bring better speeds to customers.
The focus is going to be on creating a global communication system.
Now, newer generation internet satellites, such as the one from Starlink and Project Kuiper, sit 300 miles above the Earth's surface. These satellites are launched into low Earth orbit, and due to being relatively close to the Earth, these satellites can provide users with quicker internet speeds and lower latency than previous generations. Advances in satellite receivers and satellites themselves have allowed for faster surge speeds, much more comparable to what cable internet currently provides. However, that being said, satellite internet is not as fast as your regular cable internet. In fact, newer gen satellite internet can provide speeds up to 100 to 200 megabits per second, while fiber can produce 940 megabits per second. The question is, will satellites be the future of the internet? To answer this question, we need to explore and understand traditional internet infrastructure.
Traditional internet is provided to you via fiber optic cables. This means that there are fiber optic cables connecting to your home, which then connect to your routers, providing you high-speed internet via Wi-Fi. Creating this infrastructure requires enormous amounts of capital invested. These expenses include digging trenches, laying cable or fiber, and even dealing with property rights disputes. As you can imagine, laying internet infrastructure is incredibly costly and time-consuming. If seen from the perspective of internet service providers, it makes no sense to implement infrastructure in certain areas, as it may be the case that 1. The expenses are too high, or 2. There are very little people in these areas. Combine these factors together, and it appears that internet service providers won't realize any return on their investment due to a low amount of customers in such areas. And most of these areas are in fact rural areas. Rural areas make up 97% of the landmass in the United States and are notorious for being difficult to wire cables through. Even though only 19.3% of the population lives in these areas, almost 19 million people don't have access to the internet at threshold speeds. In fact, around 14.5 million Americans do not have access to the internet at all, according to the FCC. This is clearly a problem, which is why the FCC created the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. Through this program, the goal is to provide internet access to rural areas. This is where satellite internet companies are coming into play. Spacex, founded by billionaire Elon Musk and parent company of Starlink, is one of several companies that has access to federal funds as part of the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund. In fact, the FCC has awarded Spacex nearly $866 million to implement and carry out the company's vision of providing high-speed internet access to Americans in rural areas. From the perspective of users, the installation for satellite internet is a simple two-part process. A technician from one of the satellite internet providers will come to your home to set up a satellite receiver, and then link that satellite receiver to your modem router. And with companies like Starlink and Project Kuiper, which have thousands of satellites around Earth already, rural areas in different parts of the country can have access to high-speed internet. With satellite internet, connectivity is also not entirely dependent on physicality. This means that satellite internet could be provided to anyone, anywhere, regardless of their location and current internet infrastructure. In theory, the 3.4 billion people who live in rural areas across the world could also start to gain access to high-speed internet. Elon Musk has hypothesized that people who put their trust in satellite internet will never be disappointed, even during war. And this very hypothesis is being tested right now in Eastern Europe.
Despite the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, Ukraine has been able to sustain some sort of connectivity for many of its citizens, mainly through perseverance. From continual bombing on many parts of Ukraine, the fiber optic cables and internet providers around the country have been damaged, taking many Ukrainians offline. Despite living in dangerous conditions, Ukrainian internet companies are sending out their workers on a daily basis to repair these damages and get the internet back up and running for as many Ukrainians as possible. On top of this, Russia has launched countless counterintelligence and cyber attacks upon Ukraine.
While of limited impact, this recent spate of cyber attacks in Ukraine are consistent with what a Russian effort could look like.
These hacks often halt Ukrainians from getting online and can make many in the country susceptible to personal damage. These attacks can be overcome by the Ukrainian government and workers, but it often takes time and slows down the process in getting the country back online. Although it has worked so far for Ukraine, it's not feasible for the country to continually risk the workforce with no guarantee that it will bring the internet back up every single time. This is where satellite internet comes into play. Satellite internet, because of its wireless connection, would help limit the number of people that lose internet in the country. A majority of people would be able to keep their internet up and running as long as their homes are not destroyed. Leaders and companies across the world know this, and that's why satellite internet is such a hot topic for Ukraine. In fact, it's been reported that the United States government has paid Starlink to send around 3,670 satellite receivers to Ukraine. This would help the country set up more receivers and provide undeterred access to the internet throughout the conflict. Although there are no other known reports, it's rumored that other companies are looking to help the country by donating satellite receivers. Clearly, satellite internet would help the situation in Ukraine, so why has it not been adopted all over the world yet?
There are a few limitations that make satellite internet less attractive than cable internet. First, since satellite internet reroutes data multiple times throughout its path, a large amount of data can clog up the system. This is why many satellite internet providers have limits on data usage, similar to a mobile cellular plan. What comes with this limitation is high latency. Latency is the time it takes for your data to come back to you after you send a request. Since satellite internet routes from your home to the satellite to the center and back, there is often a delay, much larger than cable internet. Second, satellite internet is dependent that there are no obstructions from the satellite receiver to the actual satellite. If there are obstructions, for example, many trees above your house, then your data may be broken up and your connection may time out. On top of those issues, satellite internet is much more costlier than fiber. Satellite internet can cost around $150 per month for 100 megabytes per second, whereas cable is just $35 per month for the same speed. Clearly, satellite internet has its downsides, and it is by no means a replacement to fiber optic cables. In fact, satellite internet usually comes behind in every category except ease of setup. This is why integration and movement towards satellite internet has not been very fast, but that does not dilute the effect that it can have. It remains a way for people to stay connected in times of desperation, such as war, and is also one of the only ways for people living in rural areas to gain access to internet at decent speeds. As technology advances, the cost of satellite internet and its downsides may also decrease, making it more comparable to fiber optic cables. And who knows, one day satellite internet may even become the norm.
On February 24th, Russian President Vladimir Putin launched a special military operation into Ukraine. In a statement, Putin said Russia cannot feel safe, develop, and exist with a constant threat emanating from the territory of modern Ukraine. Since the war's start, more than 2 million people have fled Ukraine, thousands have died,